Hi, this is Jake at Canadian Cutting Edge, and today we're doing a Terminology 101 video. I'll try to keep it nice and short. I'm talking about liner locks and frame locks, basically explaining what's early lockup, what's late lockup. There's always new people getting into the knife, said that weird, didn't I? Into the knife hobby, and you may or may not be aware of some of these terms. You may have heard them and aren't quite sure exactly what they mean and what is early lockup, and I'll try to explain that in this video. So stick around. Let's look at some of the different parts and get the labels down right before we go on too far. What you have on the left is, the locking area of a liner lock knife. What we have here on the right of the knife, in this area here, is just the blade. It's in the same orientation as it is in the complete knife here on the left. And so what you see is the blade comes back, the sharp edge is facing up, and it comes back and it terminates right here. This point is this point right here. That's the same point. And as you can just barely see, and I'm sorry I can't do a really good close-up with my camera, this edge right here has been ground on this angle. So it's got an angle ground onto it so that the locking arm will come across starting at the left and come towards the right until it binds up and can't go any further. So this locking arm starts over here and wants to come to the right, and until it comes to a point where it's bound up and it just can't move any further, it'll stop, and that's the lockup point. What you're seeing here in this picture is this piece of steel from the picture on the left. This arm right here is this arm right here. And as you can see, it's one piece with the whole liner that's been cut back far back, and now it is in a sprung state. It's in a sprung state. It wants to move to the right. So as you can see, there it is. And it comes away. The rest of the liner is just beside the G10 here, as you can see at the top here. That's the same piece of steel. But this lock arm is trying to go to the right. It's sprung that way. And so that lock arm's going over until it meets up with the knife, and where they meet up, it binds together and creates friction, and that's the lockup point where everything gets nice and tight. It's a sprung piece of steel that wants to go to the right. So it's got some springiness. If I took this knife all the way apart and just let it sit there, this piece of metal would go that way. Not terribly far, but that's what it would want to do. It wants to move that way. And so there's pressure between this liner arm and the tang of the knife that keep it in tension, which makes the lock work. So the end of the piece of steel on the knife itself is on an angle like this. Of course, not that extreme, but it's on that angle so that the lockup arm has a harder time. Sorry about hitting that. So the lockup arm has a harder time moving to the right. It keeps getting tighter and tighter and tighter until it just can't move any further right. So I'm going to put in a diagram right here to try to show you what that means. And so you can see that this lockup is done really well. A lot of guys would probably call this lockup around 40%. So if you hear that kind of word, a percentage, oh, lockup is at 50%, 60%, 45%. Each person uses that slightly differently. I try to use it based on, I'm imagining the very center point of the liner piece of steel and how far over it is from the left to the right of the blade. So 0% is on the far side. Whoops, sorry. So 0% is if it was all the way left, and 100% would be all the way to the right. And so the middle of this piece of steel is right around probably 40% over on that knife. This knife is a Kershaw, and it is at what I like to call perfect initial lockup. On a brand new knife, this is what I want to see. Whoa, I keep hitting the camera. The leftmost edge of this liner arm is lined up with the leftmost edge of the tang of the blade. And so that lockup is what I call perfect. I like to see that. So if you get a knife, especially if you can see it before you buy it, open it up. If you go into a knife shop where you're going in person and you're looking at knives, excuse me. So if you're going into a shop and looking at knives, this lockup on a liner lock is perfect. What you don't want to see is this knife. So let's move that in there. This is a knife that I ordered in the mail, so I had no choice. When I got it, I found this late lockup. It's not touching this right side liner, not yet anyways, but it's getting pretty close. If it would get to the point of touching that liner, then it would start from there to become loose. Right now, the blade is snug. Yes, it's a Ganzo. They do mess up sometimes. The blade is snug. There's no play right to left, up and down. It's a lockup that works. So there is nothing dangerous about this lockup where it is right now. There's nothing that's going to, make it a problem in using it. It just means that the life of this knife will be shorter, because every time you open the knife, it will wear just a tiny, virtually imperceptible amount to the right. And so over, several thousand lockups, it'll migrate over to the left, to the right, sorry, and it'll come to the point where it touches this liner on this side. And that's when it'll become a knife that becomes loose and the lockup just won't hold anymore. So this knife, although it works fine, the lockup's safe and everything, it's got a shorter lifespan than this lockup has. Okay, so now let me see some frame locks that I'll show you. Here's a frame lock. So it has no liners. There's this piece of steel on this side, and there's a piece of steel on the left side. And that piece of steel is one piece with this. Actually, I'm going to stop. So those are the two main things that we look for in, the lockup of a knife, a liner lock or a frame lock. Does it lock up solidly? And how much wear do we have left? If the frame lock locks up solidly, there's really nothing that you need to do. You might believe it's solid though, and it might not be. This would be a very, very rare instance, such as if the lockup was just barely engaging there, even though it feels solid to you, that's too early. That's not safe. But where this knife actually locks up, you can see right there, it's actually over a bit further. That's pretty close to the thickness of a typical liner. And some liner locks have even thinner liner locks than this. This knife is safe the way it is. You don't need to do anything to it. If you had super, super, super early lockup, I would go to that video that I talked about on how to solve blade stick. I would strop the end of that blade lightly. I wouldn't grind it down anymore. I wouldn't do anything drastic like that. Just strop it to take off just a minuscule amount of steel off the end of the tang of the blade so that your lockup could go a little bit further. So if it locks up solidly, you're good to go. Keep using it. The second and my last point that I was making is how much wear room is there left. On this knife, there's loads. Lots of room left there. On this knife, there's about 50% wear left. On this knife that I have a picture of early for late lockup has, I would say maybe 10% room of wear left. There's just very little there. So if I was in a store picking a knife out by hand, I would look at this one and leave it on the shelf. I'd get another one. And so what I often do when I go shopping in a store for knives, I'll take 5, 6, or 7 of them off the rack. Like if they're hanging on a rack, I'll pull them off. I'll compare them all and I'll pick the one that's got the best liner lock position. What Kershaw often does is they'll package a knife and sell it like this. And then I take a number of them off the shelf and I turn them over like this and I take a look. And you can see, because of the light in this package, this guy's got what I call perfect lockup. I know, sorry about the light, you just can't see it quite well enough. Maybe there you go. It's got perfect lockup. So I'd take a look at 5, 6 of these and I'd choose the best one. If you are allowed to open the knives and take a look at them, go ahead, ask them to look at 5 or 6 of them. You're spending your money. There's nothing wrong with you choosing one that has really good lockup. So just to summarize, frame locks and liner locks work very much the same way. That's why I've included them in the same video. When in doubt, if you don't know if it's a frame lock or a liner lock, or it's one of these that breaks the rules and looks like a frame lock and a liner lock, the main thing to look at in all those cases is how much space is there on the right-hand side. If there's enough space for you to feel comfortable buying it, it's got room to wear, go and buy it. If there's a lot of space on there and it's barely engaging, choose a different knife. So we'll move on to a different type of lock another time. We're going to do a video on the different types of grinds to look for, what the different types are, what's the benefits of the different types, and stuff like that. Just remember always, when you've got a knife out, cut towards your chum and not your thumb, because that would hurt.